The soft, steady hum of cooling fans is the most peaceful sound I know. It is the sound of order, of logic, of a billion infinitesimal calculations happening in perfect, synchronous harmony. For 30 years, that hum was the soundtrack to my life. A life lived in the cold, blue glow of server rooms and the relentless, nanosecond-paced world of high-frequency trading. As the chief systems architect for a major financial technology firm, my job was to build the invisible circulatory system of the modern economy, the fiber optic veins and algorithmic heart that pumped trillions of dollars around the globe every single day. I was good at it. Too good. The stress, the 24/7 vigilance, the knowledge that a single line of bad code could trigger a global market crash. It had ground me down. When I retired, I didn't want to stop maintaining the system I'd built. It was my masterpiece, my legacy, but I wanted to do it from a place of peace, a sanctuary far from the roaring chaos of the trading floor. Viridian Summit marketed itself as that sanctuary. It was a new, upscale community built on a foundation of eco-conscious principles. Every house had solar panels, every garden was organic, and the HOA bylaws were a thick tome dedicated to sustainable, low-impact living. For my needs. However, it had two far more important features: an uninterruptible, state-of-the-art underground power grid and a direct trunk line to the regional fiber optic backbone. It was the perfect place to house the node. I bought a handsome, modern house with a large, reinforced concrete basement, ready to be transformed into the private data center that would be the new, quiet heart of my life's work. The unmarked climate-controlled truck containing racks of servers and enterprise-grade power conditioners had just pulled away when she made her appearance. She didn't walk so much as process, gliding across my newly laid sod with an air of regal authority. She was in her late 60s, her silver hair cut into a severe, geometric bob. She wore expensive linen trousers and a silk blouse in a shade of sage green that perfectly matched the trim on her own house. In her hand, she held a tablet displaying what looked like a complex chart. "Welcome to Viridian Summit," she said, her voice cool and crisp, the welcome sounding more like an assessment. "I am Margaret Sterling, President of the Homeowners Association and Chair of the Green Living Committee." I wiped a bead of sweat from my brow. "Julian Croft, a pleasure to meet you." I extended a hand. She ignored it, her eyes performing a critical sweep of my property. "I was just reviewing the preliminary energy audit for your home," she said, tapping the tablet. "The contractors seem to have omitted the solar panel installation. That's a Tier 1 violation of the community's green mandate." "Ah, yes," I said, already prepared for this. "I have a medical waiver for that. The specific radio frequencies generated by the solar inverters can interfere with some sensitive medical monitoring equipment I use." It was a lie, but a plausible, HIPAA-protected one. In reality, the micro fluctuations from solar power inverters would be death to the nanosecond-level clock synchronization my systems required. Her lips pursed into a thin, disapproving line. A tiny muscle in her jaw tightened. "I see. And that—" She pointed a slender, accusatory finger at the large, commercial-grade HVAC unit on the side of my house, its fan currently silent. "That looks like an industrial cooling system. It's certainly not an energy-efficient heat pump like the rest of the community uses." "It's for my home office in the basement," I explained, keeping my tone light. "I do some data analysis consulting, and the computer equipment runs a bit hot." "Data analysis," she repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Mr. Croft, here in Viridian Summit, we are all deeply committed to reducing our carbon footprint. We take pride in our collective effort to live in harmony with the planet. Any excessive energy consumption by one resident undermines the efforts of everyone else. I trust your consulting will not be a burden on our community's environmental goals." It was not a welcome. It was a warning. I stood there on my new driveway, the dream of a quiet, peaceful existence already beginning to feel fragile. I had left a world of cutthroat hedge fund managers and ruthless CEOs, only to find myself in a new kind of jungle, ruled by a woman who wielded a carbon footprint audit like a weapon. I watched her glide back to her own perfectly sustainable home. And I knew, with a sinking certainty, that my quest for tranquility was going to be anything but. My masterpiece of a system was secure from hackers and market crashes. But I had a feeling its greatest threat was a woman in sage green linen. The first phase of Margaret's crusade was waged with the cold, impersonal weapons of bureaucracy. She was a master of the bylaw, wielding the HOA's dense rulebook with the precision of a seasoned litigator. Her primary vector of attack was, as she had promised, my energy consumption. A month after I moved in, a memo was circulated to all residents of Viridian Summit. It announced a new Community Green Initiative, proposed by President Sterling and unanimously approved by her board. The initiative's centerpiece was the mandatory installation of a new type of smart meter on every home. These meters didn't just report usage to the power company. They fed a live, publicly accessible data stream to a new section of the Viridian Summit community app. It was called the Energy Leaderboard. It ranked every household by their hourly kilowatt usage, with the top 10 consumers displayed in a list of shame titled Energy Hogs. It was a system of gamified, public humiliation, and I knew exactly who its intended audience was. The day the system went live, my house, 142 Fibonacci Way, shot straight to the #1 spot on the Energy Hogs list, and stayed there. The numbers were stark. I was consuming, on average, more energy than the next 15 houses combined. The app even had a helpful, judgmental graphic next to my name, a cartoon factory with thick, black smoke pouring from its smokestacks. The fines began a week later. Margaret had pushed through an addendum to the energy mandate, imposing a monthly environmental impact fee on any household that exceeded the community's average energy consumption by more than 200%. My fee was astronomical, more than my actual electricity bill. I paid it without complaint. I sent a certified check to the HOA every month, creating the meticulous paper trail that had become my standard operating procedure in any conflict. I tried to mitigate my usage, of course. I spent a week in the basement, a world of chilled air and humming servers, optimizing the thermal efficiency of the server racks. I recalibrated the cooling system, creating new algorithms to cycle the compressors more efficiently based on ambient external temperatures. I even installed a new heat exchange system to vent waste heat into the house's water heater. I managed to reduce my total power draw by nearly 15%, a significant engineering achievement. On the community app, it was a drop in the ocean. I remained firmly enthroned as the king of the energy hogs. The reality was, there was a baseline of power consumption I could never go below. The node wasn't a single computer. It was a cluster of high-performance servers, redundant power supplies, and enterprise-grade cooling systems. It was a living, breathing entity that had to be kept within a strict 1-degree temperature variance, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The consulting work I did was, in fact, the constant monitoring and maintenance of the primary data synchronization and latency arbitrage node for the entire Pacific Regional Stock Exchange. My system was the master clock, the single source of truth that kept billions of dollars in automated trades from descending into chaos. If its internal atomic clock, which was synchronized to the national standard in Boulder, Colorado, drifted by even a few nanoseconds, the consequences could be catastrophic. One evening, while running a diagnostic on the primary failover system. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the blinking lights of the server racks, each one a tiny, winking star in my technological galaxy. The sheer complexity of the system was breathtaking. I was managing petabytes of data, maintaining near light-speed communication with exchanges in Tokyo and Singapore, and ensuring 99.9999% uptime for a critical piece of global financial infrastructure. And yet, the most immediate and persistent threat to this entire operation was a woman who believed my house was single-handedly causing global warming because she saw a scary number on her smartphone app. The absurdity was staggering. I was holding the digital world together with my bare hands, and Margaret Sterling was fining me because my light was burning too brightly. When her campaign of fines and public shaming failed to curb my energy usage, Margaret's tactics devolved into something more direct and sinister. The conflict moved from the digital realm of apps and emails to the physical world of my property. The acts of vandalism were minor, cleverly deniable, and aimed with a frightening precision at the critical life support systems of the node. The first attack was on the cooling system. The large, commercial-grade HVAC unit on the side of my house was the primary lung of my entire operation, inhaling cool air to dissipate the immense heat generated by the server racks. Its main air intake was a large, grated vent near the foundation. One sweltering August morning, a series of high-pitched alarms blared from the monitoring console in my basement. A quick glance at the thermal diagnostics display showed a terrifying spike in the core temperature of the server cluster. It was a code red event. If the temperature continued to rise, the system would perform an emergency shutdown to prevent the processors from literally melting, taking the entire stock exchange feed down with it. I raced outside, my heart hammering in my chest. I found the problem immediately. The entire intake vent was completely and deliberately blocked. A huge, dense pile of wet, heavy mulch from my own freshly manicured garden beds had been packed tightly against the grate, choking off all airflow. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the wind. The mulch had been piled with a vindictive, systematic thoroughness. I spent a frantic 10 minutes clawing the muck away with my bare hands. As soon as the airway was clear, I could hear the powerful fans inside spin up to their maximum speed, a desperate gasp for air. I sprinted back to the basement and watched the temperature reading slowly, agonizingly, begin to drop. I had averted a shutdown by less than 2 minutes. The second incident, a few weeks later, was more subtle, but equally malicious. The dedicated fiber optic line that was the node's connection to the outside world ran through a small, green utility box at the edge of my property near the street. One day, I noticed the box's heavy-duty cover was ajar. I went to inspect it and found that the main weather seal had been carefully pried away and the locking bolt had been loosened, leaving the delicate fiber optic junction exposed to the elements. A single heavy rainstorm could have flooded the box, severing my connection and causing another catastrophic failure. These were not the acts of random vandals. Teenagers don't methodically clog an HVAC intake. This was the work of someone who had been observing my property, identifying its critical vulnerabilities, and attacking them. It was Margaret, or rather, I suspected it was her husband, a quiet, defeated-looking man I sometimes saw doing yard work, acting as her dutiful saboteur. My response was born of 30 years of designing secure, redundant systems. You don't just patch a vulnerability, you harden the entire system against future attacks. That weekend, I had a team of discreet security contractors come to my house. They enclosed the HVAC unit in a locked steel cage, the kind used to prevent copper theft from commercial buildings. They replaced the standard utility box for the fiber optic line with a hardened, subterranean conduit, its access point now flush with the ground and requiring a specialized key. And then, I upgraded my surveillance. The simple doorbell camera I had was a toy. I installed a network of professional thermal imaging cameras. Unlike regular cameras, thermal cameras didn't need light. They detected heat signatures. A person moving across my lawn in the dead of night would appear as a bright, glowing figure on my monitor. It was the same technology used for perimeter security at high-level data centers and military installations. As I configured the system, linking it to a dedicated, secure server in the basement, I couldn't help but feel a grim sense of irony. I had spent my career designing digital fortresses to protect data from unseen threats in cyberspace. Now I was being forced to build a physical fortress to protect my home from the very real threat of my next-door neighbor. Margaret Sterling thought she was an environmental activist, a warrior for the planet. She had no idea her righteous crusade had just escalated her status. In my own private threat assessment, from nuisance to active, malicious agent, and I would now be monitoring her accordingly. Having failed to disable me through direct sabotage, Margaret refocused her efforts on a weapon she wielded with masterful skill: social ostracization. She used the Viridian Summit Green Living online forum as her personal propaganda machine, relentlessly painting me as a villainous, planet-destroying recluse who was single-handedly undermining the community's utopian vision. Her posts were a toxic cocktail of self-righteousness and passive-aggressive shaming. She would post screenshots from the Energy Hogs leaderboard every single day, with my house always at the top, circled in a thick, angry red line. She would accompany these with sanctimonious captions. Good morning, Viridian Summit. One post began, bright and cheerful. Another beautiful day to be grateful for our wonderful, green community. Let's all remember to do our part. Most of us are, but as you can see, some of us still believe their personal needs are more important than the health of our shared planet. This level of consumption is not just wasteful. It is a moral failure. She never used my name directly in the posts, but she didn't have to. The house at 142 Fibonacci Way became a byword for selfish excess. The comment sections were a cesspool of digital pitchforks and torches. It's disgusting. One neighbor wrote, "We're all sacrificing, using our clotheslines and composting, and he's running a secret factory or something." I heard the humming sound from his house the other night. Another lied. It's unnatural. It's probably not even safe. The campaign of slander was brutally effective. The community, which had been merely cool towards me, now became openly hostile. If I was out in my yard, neighbors would hurry inside. People would openly point at my house as they walked past. At the community's organic vegetable garden, where I had a small plot to grow tomatoes, I found my plants uprooted and tossed aside. A small, hand-painted sign had been stabbed into the soil. Energy hogs not welcome. I was completely and utterly isolated. The peace and quiet I had moved here to find had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The silence of being shunned. The irony was that the work I was doing in my basement was the epitome of efficiency. The node processed trillions of transactions with a fraction of the energy it would take the thousands of individual servers it had replaced. My creation was a masterpiece of green technology in the financial sector, a fact that was both a closely guarded secret and a source of bitter amusement for me. The ugliest incident occurred one afternoon when a specialized technician came to service the node's internal fire suppression system. His name was Kenji, a brilliant young engineer from a firm in Silicon Valley. He was of Japanese descent, and he had a quiet, professional demeanor. As he was leaving, Margaret Sterling was out in her yard, ostensibly weeding her petunias. I saw her stare at Kenji. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. She picked up her phone, That evening, a new, even more vile post appeared on the forum. "Neighbors, I don't want to be an alarmist," she wrote, "but the man at 142 is now having foreign nationals visit his home. I saw a man of Asian descent leaving his house today. Given the amount of power he is using and the secrecy of his operation, one has to wonder about corporate or even international espionage. This may be more than just an environmental issue. It could be a security risk to us all." The racism was as blatant as it was breathtaking. She had crossed a line from neighborhood busybody to something far uglier. This was no longer about energy consumption. This was about a woman whose obsessive need for control had curdled into xenophobic paranoia. I took a screenshot of the post. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a white-hot, crystalline rage. I opened the secure, encrypted folder on my computer, where I was storing the evidence of her campaign. The folder was labeled Sterling. I created a new subfolder. I named it Hate Speech. I thought about my friend and former protege, Akira Tanaka, the man who had helped me design the core architecture of the node. I thought about the global, diverse team of geniuses who had made my life's work possible. Margaret, in her ignorant little kingdom of beige houses and organic gardens, was attacking a world she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And I knew then that my response, when it came, would not be about just defending my work. It would be about utterly and completely dismantling hers. When her campaign of slander and sabotage failed to produce the desired result, Margaret escalated to her final, most powerful weapon, weaponizing government agencies. She was no longer content to be the queen of her small, suburban kingdom. She now sought to bring the full, crushing weight of the state down upon me. Her obsession had reached its zenith. She was convinced I was a danger, and she would use any means necessary to stop me. Her first move was to file a formal complaint with the state's Public Utilities Commission. Her complaint was a work of paranoid fiction, a multi-page diatribe accusing me of running an unlicensed, unregulated, and dangerously high-consumption data center in a residential zone. She claimed I was placing a critical and unsafe strain on the local power grid, and she demanded an immediate investigation and a disconnection of my services. A week later, a man from the PUC was at my door. He was not a bureaucrat. He was a serious, professional-looking electrical engineer named Mr. Davies, and his job was to investigate grid integrity. He had a copy of Margaret's complaint in his hand, and his expression was one of weary skepticism. "Mr. Julian Croft," he asked, "I'm with the Public Utilities Commission. We need to inspect the source of your high power draw." "Of course," I said, my mind racing. This was a far more dangerous encounter than dealing with the HOA. This man understood power, and he would not be fooled by simple explanations. "It's my home office, in the basement." I led him downstairs and opened the insulated door to the server room. The blast of cold air and the steady, low hum of the servers washed over us. Mr. Davies stopped dead, his professional skepticism melting into a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. He was expecting a few souped-up gaming PCs. He was looking at what was, for all intents and purposes, a small, enterprise-grade data center. "Good Lord," he muttered, his eyes scanning the racks of blinking lights, the thick bundles of neatly managed cables, the massive, redundant, uninterruptible power supplies. "The complaint said you had computer equipment. It didn't say you had the entire West Coast." He walked slowly through the aisles, his expert gaze taking in every detail. He noted the industrial-grade power conditioners, the liquid cooling system, the seismic bracing on the server racks. "This is not a home office, Mr. Croft," he said, his voice quiet but firm. This is a Tier 3 data node. I've only ever seen setups like this at banks and research institutions. What in the world are you doing down here? I had to be careful. The true nature of the node was protected by a series of non-disclosure agreements that carried penalties in the tens of millions of dollars. I run a private cloud and data analysis node for a financial consulting firm, I said, sticking to my carefully prepared cover story. We process large, time-sensitive data sets. The work requires a high degree of uptime and data integrity. He nodded, but his eyes were narrowed. He pointed to the thick, heavily shielded conduit that entered the basement through a dedicated port in the foundation. And that's a direct, hardened fiber optic trunk line. That's not a commercial business connection. Who's your provider? I named the high-level, enterprise-only telecommunications provider, a name that meant nothing to a civilian, but everything to an engineer like him. His eyebrows shot up. That's a direct connection to the backbone, he whispered, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. The bandwidth you must have. What are you analyzing, Mr. Croft? The human genome. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of my client's data, I said smoothly. Mr. Davies was silent for a long time, looking from the impressive hardware to me. He knew he was looking at something far beyond the scope of a simple zoning ordinance, but he couldn't prove what it was. Mr. Croft, he said finally, his tone shifting. From a purely technical standpoint, I'm impressed. Your setup is immaculate. Your power is conditioned, and you're not actually a strain on the grid. You're just a very, very large customer. However, he added, his official demeanor returning, operating an industrial-scale facility like this in a residential zone is a serious violation. I have to file a report. The zoning board will be contacting you. I'd advise you to get a lawyer. After he left, the silence of the house felt heavy, oppressive. The walls were closing in. Margaret had found the one vector of attack I couldn't easily deflect. The node's physical location was its greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. I picked up my secure phone and made a call to Tokyo. Akira, I said when my old friend and protege answered. We have a problem. A big one. I explained the PUC visit. The shell cover is getting thin. My friend, they're probing the infrastructure. They've found the trunk line. It's only a matter of time before someone with the right clearance starts asking questions we can't answer with the consulting firm cover story. Akira was silent for a moment. What do you recommend, Julian-sensei? It's time to brief the exchange's COO, I said, a sense of grim finality in my voice. Inform him that the operational security of Node Pacific Alpha is compromised by a local, civilian threat. Tell him we may need to take proactive measures. I understand, Akira said. I will make the call. Be careful, Sensei. I hung up the phone. The game had changed. It was no longer a one-on-one battle with Margaret Sterling. I had just put the multi-trillion-dollar machine of the global stock exchange on notice. And when that machine felt threatened, it did not move with subtlety. The official report from the Public Utilities Commission, while not resulting in an immediate shutdown, was the spark that ignited the final, raging inferno of Margaret Sterling's obsession. She saw the lack of immediate action not as a failure, but as a sign that the entire system was corrupt, and that she, and she alone, was the last bastion of environmental justice. Her crusade had evolved into a righteous, holy war, and she was its avenging angel. The final confrontation was not a surprise. I had been expecting it. My thermal cameras had captured her pacing the edge of her property for the past 2 nights, her silhouette a beacon of glowing rage in the cool, infrared world of the monitor. She was a predator, stalking her prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came on a gray, overcast afternoon. I was in my small vegetable garden, tending to the tomato plants that had survived the earlier attack, trying to find a moment of peace in the earth. I felt a presence and looked up. She was standing at the property line, not 10 feet away. Her face was pale, her eyes burning with a zealot's fire, and in her right hand, she was holding a pair of heavy, bright yellow, insulated linesman's pliers, the kind used for cutting thick, high-voltage electrical cables. "I have warned you, Croft," she said, her voice low and trembling with a terrifying mixture of fury and exhilaration. "I have filed complaints. I have followed the rules. But the system is broken. It protects monsters like you." "Margaret," I said, my voice calm and even, as I slowly rose to my feet. "Put the pliers down. What you are contemplating is incredibly dangerous, and it is a federal crime." "The real crime," she hissed, taking a step onto my property, "is what you are doing in that house. You are a cancer, a parasite on this community, on this planet. You sit in your air-conditioned bunker, burning through the energy of a small town, while the rest of us try to save the world. You are the problem." Her entire body was vibrating with a self-righteous energy. She was no longer just an angry neighbor. She had disconnected from rational thought. She was an eco-terrorist in a silk blouse. "I have given you every chance to be a decent human being," she continued, her voice rising, "but you refuse to listen. You refuse to change. So, I will force you. If the authorities won't pull the plug on your planet-killing machine, then I will do it myself. I know where the main power conduit for your house is. I've seen the schematics on the county website. I will cut you off from the grid." This was it. The ultimate threat. She wasn't just threatening my property. She was threatening to execute the node. A sudden, uncontrolled power loss could corrupt petabytes of data, fry tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment, and, most critically, bring the entire Pacific financial market to a screeching, catastrophic halt. The damage would be incalculable, measured not just in dollars, but in global economic stability. I looked at her, at the crazed, triumphant look in her eyes, at the heavy-duty pliers in her hand. My entire career had been about building redundant, fail-safe systems, preparing for every possible contingency, from solar flares to cyber attacks. But I had never planned for a contingency named Margaret Sterling. "You have no idea what you are messing with," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. The time for placating her, for hiding the truth, was over. She was about to cross a line from which there was no return. "This is your final warning. Walk away." "It's over, Julian," she said, using my first name for the first time, a pronouncement of final victory. "Your time of selfish waste is over." She turned and marched with grim purpose toward the side of my house, toward the large, green metal box that housed the main power nexus. I didn't try to stop her physically. It was too late for that. I simply pulled out my secure phone, my fingers flying across the screen, initiating the final protocol I had discussed with Akira, the contingency plan, the endgame. The machine was now in motion. The world went silent for a fraction of a second, and then all hell broke loose. I was in the basement, my eyes glued to the main power monitoring screen. I saw the voltage flicker, then plummet to zero. A deafening klaxon began to blare through the room as the entire system switched to the uninterruptible power supplies. The battery backups had kicked in, their cooling fans screaming like jet engines as they took on the massive, sudden load. A large red countdown timer appeared on my main monitor, 20:0. I had 20 minutes of battery life before the node, and by extension, a significant portion of the global financial market went completely dark. I sprinted up the stairs and burst out the side door. Margaret was there, standing in front of the main utility box, its heavy metal door pried open. She had a look of ecstatic, triumphant release on her face. She had just thrown the massive main breaker switch, physically severing my house from the electrical grid. "It's over!" she shouted, her voice ringing with insane victory as she saw me. "I've done it! Your machine is dead. The planet can breathe again." At that exact moment, my secure phone buzzed violently in my pocket. The caller ID was a secure, encrypted link from the exchange's headquarters. I answered it. "Julian, what the hell is happening?" The voice was high-pitched with panic. It was David Chen, the chief operating officer of the exchange, a man I knew who never, ever lost his cool. The entire Pacific Futures and Options data feed just went dark. "Your node is offline. We're blind." "Julian, the arbitrage bots are going insane. The market is seizing up. We're reporting a total system failure originating from your location." As Margaret stood there, basking in the glory of her righteous act, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows came screeching around the corner, its tires protesting on the quiet suburban asphalt. It fishtailed to a halt in front of my house. David Chen, his face pale and beaded with sweat, burst out of the passenger side before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. He ran towards me, his eyes wide with a terror I had only ever seen on the faces of traders during a full-blown market crash. He completely ignored Margaret, as if she were nothing more than a piece of garden statuary. "Julian, what's the status?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "We have less than 19 minutes of battery, and the emergency generators are reporting a fuel line fault. The entire market is trading on ghost data billions. Julian, billions of dollars are vaporizing every second we're offline." This was the moment. The final, terrible reveal. I didn't say a word. I simply raised a trembling hand and pointed at Margaret Sterling, who was now staring at the scene, her look of triumph curdling into one of utter, horrified confusion. "She did it," I said, my voice flat and dead. "She cut the main power." David Chen and the two large, grim-faced men who had emerged from the Escalade, men who were clearly not corporate executives, all turned their heads in perfect unison to stare at the woman in the sage green blouse. Margaret stood frozen, the heavy yellow pliers still clutched in her hand like a pagan idol. Chen's face, already pale, went completely white. He took a step towards her, his voice dropping to a shaking, venomous whisper. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" He turned to the two men, who I now recognized from their lapel pins as federal agents from the SEC's Critical Infrastructure Enforcement Division. "This is Julian Croft," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and awe. "He didn't just design the exchange's entire trading architecture. He is the architecture. That's not a house that is Node Pacific Alpha, the primary data synchronization and latency arbitrage node for the entire Pacific Rim. She didn't just flip a breaker." His voice rose to a near scream. "She effectively shut down the financial nervous system of the entire West Coast." The federal agents exchanged a look of cold, grim understanding. They began to walk slowly, purposefully, toward Margaret. She finally seemed to comprehend the enormity of what had happened. The color drained from her face. The yellow pliers slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the concrete driveway. The sound was like a gavel, announcing the end of her world. The resolution was not a quiet affair. It was a full-blown, multi-agency firestorm. Margaret Sterling was taken into custody on the spot by the federal agents. As she was being led away, her face a mask of catatonic shock, a team of utility engineers, escorted by more agents, swarmed the power conduit, restoring the main feed with a speed and efficiency I had never seen from a public utility. The node was back on grid power, with less than 7 minutes of battery life to spare. The market stabilized, but the damage was done. Margaret was not charged with simple vandalism. She was facing a battery of federal charges, including tampering with critical financial infrastructure, corporate sabotage, and, thanks to a creative prosecutor invoking the Patriot Act, domestic terrorism. The 7 minutes the exchange was dark had caused a documented market fluctuation of over $100 billion. A flash crash that had real-world consequences for pension funds, businesses, and investors around the globe. She was no longer an HOA president. She was a national news story, the HOA Karen who broke the stock market. She was prosecuted to the fullest, unforgiving extent of the law. Faced with a mountain of evidence, including my security footage and her own incriminating posts on the community forum, she received a lengthy federal prison sentence. Her assets were seized to pay a fraction of the court-ordered restitution, and she vanished into the anonymity of the federal penitentiary system. The fallout for Viridian Summit was almost as severe. The HOA was named in a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit by the stock exchange for gross negligence. Their insurance carrier dropped them instantly. The community was forced into a massive settlement that bankrupted the HOA and placed a decade-long lien on every property. But for me, the outcome was peaceful. The exchange, terrified of a repeat incident, took extraordinary measures to secure their most valuable asset. They bought the 2 houses on either side of mine, paying the owners triple the market value. The houses were demolished. In their place, a discreet, state-of-the-art security perimeter was built, complete with a dedicated, redundant, subterranean power substation and a satellite communications array. My quiet suburban home was now a fortified, self-sustaining compound. This morning, I sit in my garden, sipping a cup of tea. The only sound is the gentle rustle of my tomato plants and the distant, almost imperceptible hum of the new substation, the sound of perfect, orderly power. The new, chastened HOA has given my property a permanent, unconditional exemption from all community rules. The neighbors give my discreetly fenced property a wide, respectful berth. The node hums along in the basement, more secure and more robust than ever. I had sought to escape the chaos of the financial world, but in the end, that world had reached out and built a fortress of solitude around me. The silence is absolute. The peace is finally real.